Hey, John Gilroy here. In a world of massive federal data sets, today, how to get insight and fast access. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Randy Hayes, Vice President, Public Sector, Vast Data Federal. Randy, how are you?
I'm doing great, John. It's been a little while, but it's good to see you.
Hey, I got up early this morning and I got my little Google machine and I typed in Vast Data Federal and Vast Data. Wow. I mean, been around since 2015, kind of hiding until about 2018, 2019. Then you exploded. I mean, this is the story. I mean, let's talk about the federal government, you guys, but wow, what a successful company.
Yeah, it's been pretty wild. And, just looking at the growth and, the number of people that we've hired just in the last couple of years. And it's just, we like to refer to it as the rocket ship, and it really is. It's pretty wild.
Wow. So I'll ask the obvious question. Okay, obviously good value to many different commercial companies, but so what is your value proposition for federal IT?
Sure. So I think the best way to answer this is to kind of walk you through why the company was even founded and kind of what we did and kind of just a little bit of idea of, the thought process. So, our founder really was like, hey, I want to build the world's first thinking machine, something that was going to answer questions before they were asked, right? And so you can think about, the applicability across, DoD, healthcare, all these different industries. But in 2016, nobody was really talking about AI except maybe Jensen and nVidia. And so we looked around and we were like, you know what, there's a problem. There really wasn't a data platform or a storage platform that was built for that problem statement. And if you think about AI and machine learning, it's basically a random read problem where you're looking across, no pun intended, a vast amount of data and comparing and contrasting different data sets. And so, and if you think about that, it's a random read problem. And the only way to truly solve random read was to put all of your data on flash. But the problem was that was cost prohibitive up until now. And so we figured out some novel ways to drive the cost of flash down where compared to a hybrid storage system. And so that's kind of what we came to market with initially. And so we originally were calling it universal storage system, because if you could solve the cost problem of flash, why wouldn't you put all of your data on flash, right? And so, but the challenge, especially on the federal side, is you have these kind of revolving refresh cycles that are 3 or 5 years. And so when you think about traditional storage systems, you have, kind of tiers of storage. And so, what we found is we started inserting ourselves in all these different tiers. And then as other storage systems came off support, we basically would grow up the pyramid or down the pyramid. And so, people were using us for, all flash, HPC, and AI scratch. They were using us for backup and archive and everything in between, whether it's enterprise IT or, other types of systems like this for log data and things like that. So that's what we originally came to market with. But this is more of like a 4-part play for us. And so we came to market with that in 2018. And what's really interesting, NIH was our 3rd ever customer. So we were selling to the federal government right out the gate. And so we started building a lot of the feature functionality of what traditional vendors would think of as barriers to entry into the federal market. And since we started selling to the federal market, literally right from the beginning, the company was built to, handle all of these different, requirements that the federal government puts on people. So really fast, all flash file object, all flash storage system was kind of Act 1. Act 2 was, if you think about AI and machine learning, you have to contextualize that data, right? It's nice that you have all this unstructured data on a really fast system, but now you have to understand what that data actually is. And so about 2 years ago, we came out with our Vast Database, which is an exascale partitionless database. And so now we can take metadata, we can take user-defined metadata and contextualize all that unstructured data sets. So that was kind of the next, kind of iteration of the product. And then the next version of that we came out with about a year ago is our data engine. And so now we've built lambdas and functions, and basically built an end-to-end AI and machine learning pipeline engine where we can ingest data from really almost any source, contextualize it, and then kick off triggers and functions depending on what you're trying to do. And I'll touch on some other things, but that kind of gives you a general, thought process around the system. And then the last thing that we built, because we know data is created everywhere, we had to build a global namespace that spanned edge, core, and cloud. Because if you think about it, everybody knows data has gravity. Well, guess what? Compute and GPUs even further have gravity. And so people have a finite amount of GPUs, or they want to burst to the cloud. And so having a global namespace that you can access your data from anywhere on the planet gives you some really cool capabilities, especially if you think about, kind of our DoD and intelligence community.
Yeah. Let's dive deeper into this whole community. Today I released an interview with folks at MITRE, and they're officially a .org, but are they a .gov? I mean, it's really it's almost like a government organization. So how have you worked with those folks?
Yeah, great question. So we built in conjunction with nVidia and government acquisitions, we built a nVidia SuperPod with a vast storage architecture underneath, and it's called the MITRE AI Sandbox. And so they were very forward-leaning. They knew that the federal government was behind, and some, depending on who you talk to, right? But they were behind from an AI adoption perspective, and they wanted to make it easy for agencies to be able to get access to GPUs and start building models or training systems. And so they built this SuperPod with VAST on the back end to support their architecture. And now the different agencies can go and request time on that system from MITRE. So it's a great showcase for MITRE. It's a great showcase for NVIDIA. And then obviously people also get a little access to the VAST system and see how easy it is to use and the performance and things like that.
I'll get to use a fancy word. The fancy word is nomenclature. So this term, SuperPod, is that an NVIDIA term? Is it your term, or where did it originate?
So it originated in NVIDIA. So there's all kinds of, NVIDIA's got a lot of really cool terms.
Yeah.
SuperPod is basically 32 NVIDIA DGX systems that each have 8 GPUs in them. So it's a really big system. It's multiple racks, and it's a super powerful architecture. So the fact that MITRE leaned in and is providing this to basically the entire federal government is pretty cool.
So you do events with NVIDIA, East Coast, West Coast. What kind of events coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be out at GTC in San Jose. And so that's coming up in mid-March. So we'll have a really strong presence out there. We actually just did, NVIDIA had a government AI summit in DC a few months back. And so, we were also there and had some really great meetings with customers as well.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you work for another company and trying to figure out who to partner with, and you're out there, well, go out there and grab Randy and have a talk and find out, because NVIDIA's white hot, and NVIDIA has a history of not choosing, not betting on the wrong team. They're betting on you, Randy.
Yeah, for sure. We've done a lot of great solutions with them, and there's a lot more coming down the line.
Okay, a little bit of snow in Washington, D.C. here, and kind of risky driving your car. You want to stick home, black ice, bad things happen. So AI in the federal government, where's the black ice? Where's the challenge?
No, that's great. I think there's a lot of opinions out here. I'll give you mine because that's what it is. But I think, it's the risk of not moving fast enough. And I think there's been some changes, in November, and I think the new administration coming in, I think, is going to force some change, especially to speed things up. With Elon coming in, helping out in some of these facets, we're pretty poised on that because, we just sold, almost an exabyte to XAI. So we're selling to a lot of Elon's customers. And if you think about the XAI deployment, they stood up 100,000 GPUs in about 90 days with an exabyte of storage. And so, we're supporting those type of customers. And so I think the government has to figure out how they can move faster. And if you look at the industry right now, there's some really interesting things happening. So you have the hyperscalers, and a lot of the AI work has been being done in AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google and OCI, sprinkle in a little bit IBM. But what we're seeing on the commercial side is the kind of the new AI as a service type of cloud. So a lot of these are our big customers as well. So if you start looking at a company like CoreWeave, they build AI as a service. It's pretty wild, the amount of GPUs that they're buying and the amount of capacity that they're bringing in. And so they're doing, and versus like, AWS and Google are doing GPU as a service. These companies are starting to do AI as a service. And so you have CoreWeave, you have Lambda Labs, you have a bunch of others that are kind of building this. And then you start seeing these sovereign clouds. And so that's something that I think is really interesting to the federal government, is a cloud that they own exclusively with their data on it. And so a good example of this is G42 coming out of the UAE. They're building this sovereign cloud because they don't trust everybody with their data. And so they want to build it themselves. So I think there's some really interesting things happening on the commercial side of things. And I think that's actually one of the really interesting values that VAST brings to the table, is we've built hundreds of these AI pipeline systems for all these different companies. And, commercial has always moved a little bit faster than federal, unless you're like talking about hypersonics and, things like that. But that gap is widening because AI right now, from a macro perspective, is changing every 6 months. From a micro perspective, it's changing every 6 weeks. And so we have this massive commercial team that's building all of these clouds. So we have the experience to support all of, kind of the different pipelines. And when we go talk to these federal customers, they should be asking the question, well, how many AI pipelines have you built? And we can say hundreds. And so we have the experience on the commercial side. And now it's on my team to start, working through and making sure that we're helping solve some of the harder problems.
You used the word trust about 3 minutes ago. And I'm sure if I sat down with the CIO and I mumbled trust, they'd go, zero trust? So zero trust is a topic here. And usually they talk about pillars. So the first pillar normally is identification with zero trust. We know the federal government's pushing zeros. We know that. And if the first step is, verification, did you play in that space?
Yeah, for sure. So from a zero trust perspective, it's a really interesting thing. So if you talk to a CISO, inside the federal government, they're going to talk about observability. They want to be able to see everything, right? And so, meaning so they can see across their entire network at any given time, so that if there's an attack or something just looks out of place, they can understand that. And so, we're already doing that work at places inside the Air Force and the VA and a bunch of others that are looking at the architecture. And so we've also stamped out a zero trust architecture specifically for the data pillar. And so, in my opinion, that's the hardest piece, because you need to be able to audit everything. And so that's one of the really interesting things, is we audit every IO that comes in the system, whether it's from an end user or an admin. So, for insider threat and things like this. And I can tell you, one of the biggest, I think, challenges that the federal government have is, our adversaries are going to be trying to poison the data, so that when they're training models or they're doing inference at the edge, the data is not right. And so then you get model drift, and then all of a sudden the results that you're getting back are not what are actually representative of the actual data. And so that comes down to security, that comes to auditability. And so there's some really interesting capabilities that we've built with attribute-based access control. We also support multi-category security, so we can support multiple different SAP programs on the DoD side. So SAP is Special Access Program. So now a lot of the integrators in DoD can consolidate multiple programs down onto a single system and get the benefits of, having just one giant tier of storage that can handle your full data pipeline. One other tag on that, we have ATOs at all the DoD branches, as well as the intelligence community, and we're in process for our DoD APL. So we're checking all the boxes. And again, this goes back to my discussion about, we've been selling to the federal government since day one, and we've been just checking off the boxes of all the security requirements. We were one of the first companies to have FIPS 140-3. cryptographic certs from NIST. And so we're just checking all the security boxes and then adding this attribute-based access control, as well as auditing literally everything. And so if you remember, I talked about that database. We could dump all that audit data in a database. And so now the CISOs can instantaneously see exactly what's going on across all of their architecture. And so that's, one of the really interesting capabilities that's just built into the platform. We don't charge for it. It just comes with the platform.
Well, Randy, this is part of the podcast where I come up with a quote, a provocative quote, and you can agree or disagree or modify. So here it is. There's a research scientist, a senior research scientist at nVidia. His name's David Hall. And he once said that, it's hard for me to even read this, but this is what he said. He said, nVidia has solved the problem. They solved all the problems. The real problem is data centers. And so he says, that Moore's Law is over. We done broke that. Now the real challenge is data centers. So is this a good perspective? So what about you guys in data centers? I mean, we're going to have like a nuclear reactor over here in Ashburn, Virginia for the data centers?
Probably, to be honest. By the way, I could solve nobody wants to live by a nuclear reactor. So we just, surround them with solar farms and then everybody's far enough away. You're good on that end, right? But so I would agree with that. So there's two things that kind of brings up. So one, NVIDIA is, they are innovating at a breakneck pace. And so I talked about that macro change of AI every, 6 months. NVIDIA is bringing things to the market that nobody can even touch. So even last night, Jensen was talking at CES and they brought out this new NVIDIA blueprint. And so we actually partner with them on this NVIDIA blueprint all the way back to when they stood up NVIDIA NIMs. And so NIMs are NVIDIA inference microservices. And so you can basically take pre-built AI specific inference engines and models, and then layer that on top of the VAST system and run those models that are already pre-built against your data, right? And you think about the federal government, they have probably one of the largest unused data sets in the world because it's all over the place. And so in order to make, real-time decisions on this, you need to be able to build this out. And so the NVIDIA blueprint, they came out. And so we now, in conjunction with, NVIDIA, we could do data extraction out of PDFs. We could do video search and summary. Think about how useful that would be from the federal government. You can think of from a DoD and IC perspective, it's obvious. But if you think about healthcare, looking at all the genomic data, I think one of the biggest challenges in healthcare is annotating, and annotating, I should say, all of that data that comes in versus having, a clinical researcher have to write everything out. You can now just pull things out of PDFs and it's going to save people a tremendous amount of time. So I think the NVIDIA solved it. They're constantly solving it. I think it's probably the better discussion point. And then from a data center perspective, I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges for the federal government, because I've been in a lot of data centers. I've been in a lot of federal data centers, and a lot of them are old and they don't have the power requirements to handle the amount of GPUs that are being sold in a lot of these places. And so I think you're going to see a lot more colos. Again, I think you're going to see a lot more of these AI as a service companies pop out and or try to come in and support the federal government. But power is the number one problem. And this is across the world right now. This isn't just like a federal problem. Power is a huge issue for any of these AI models. And I think, whoever solves the power problem across the world is going to win the AI race, because that's really, if you boil it all the way down, power is the number one challenge.
Well, if you're listening to this and you got a desktop computer, fire up that computer, go to Google Trends and type in cloud repatriation. What you'll find is that it's flat till 2022. And all of a sudden people are going, well, this cloud's fine, but we're got to move back home here. So I would imagine if you can handle vast amounts of data, it would that might be a sweet spot for you. Cloud repatriation, do you play in that area?
We do. I think we look at the world as a lot of it's going to be hybrid. And I think that's kind of, the federal government wasn't doing anything in the cloud, and then they swang super far into the cloud. And now they've and you can even hear it in some of the words that they're using, right? So it's cloud first. Now it's cloud smart. And so I think just like most of the enterprises, in the world, it's a hybrid world. And so again, we brought up this global namespace that spans edge, core, and cloud. We allow you to put data in the cloud. We allow you to put data on-prem or at the edge. It gives us a lot of value to our customers to put data where it economically makes sense, or it gives us the ability to move data around in an automated fashion so that we can prefetch data and, hey, we have some CPU or GPU resources in the cloud. Let's move some data up there, process it, and then either move it back or delete it. And so I think there's a lot of instances of kind of the hybrid systems that are coming to play. And like I said, it's just, people have kind of come to this cloud smart, and, nobody's run an Exchange server in their, in their data center in probably 10 years, right? And so there's a lot of really good applications that just make sense that, they just go whole hog into the cloud. And then there's others that you have to have a business decision about.
Yeah, I think we discovered the name of this interview is going to be Edge Core Cloud. Innovations with Edge Core and Cloud. This has been really interesting. I'm going to put in the show notes a link to that NVIDIA conference on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day in San Jose, California. Go out there and talk to the vast people and go to YouTube. All kinds of fun things. One of the founders is a guy named Jeff Denworth. He's got some great videos on exactly how VAST works. He talks about the pyramid, the triangle, and it really clears it up for non-technical people like me. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Randy Hayes, Vice President, Public Sector, VAST Data Federal. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.